Jake's world narrowed to a single point. This door, this woman, this moment. Beyond it there was nothing. Before conscious thought could stop him, the giant dropped to one knee on the wooden porch. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "I swear to God, I'll work harder than any man you've ever known. Just please don't turn me away." The widow stood frozen, gun still in hand, staring at this enormous man who had just knelt before her and begged. She should send him away. Every instinct screamed caution, but loneliness recognized loneliness. "There's a bunkhouse," she heard herself say. Neither of them knew this single act of mercy would ignite a love that would defy an entire town and uncover a murder that changed everything. Montana, winter 1920. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wood-paneled study. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains covering the ranch in silence. Inside, an old man sat in a leather armchair, his weathered hands folded across his lap. At 78, Jacob Sullivan still carried the frame of the giant he had once been, though time had bent his shoulders and silvered his hair. Across from him, his grandson Thomas perched on a stool 12 years old with eyes wide and eager. The boy had asked the question that all grandchildren eventually ask. "How did you meet, Grandma?" Jake stared into the flames for a long moment, watching the orange light flicker and dance. The warmth touched his face, but could not quite reach the cold place where certain memories lived. "That's a story not easily told." "Thomas," he said finally, his voice carrying the gravel of age but still holding steady, "because it begins with a crime I didn't commit, and it ends with a happiness I never thought I'd deserve." The boy leaned forward, captivated. "It was the winter of 1878. I was 36 years old. I had been a deputy U.S. Marshal for 6 years, a good lawman, an honest one, but then everything collapsed." Jake's eyes grew distant, looking past the fire, past the walls, past the decades that separated him from that frozen December morning. "Let me tell you how a desperate man found salvation, and how a lonely woman found courage." The old man took a breath and began. December 18th, 1878, 6:15 in the morning. The cold bit deep into Jake Sullivan's bones as he stood beside his Ford Model T, breath misting in the air. -8 degrees Celsius. The thermometer on the general store across the street confirmed what his frozen fingers already knew. Montana winter showed no mercy. He had slept in this covered wagon for 47 consecutive nights. The space behind the driver's bench had been cleared, replaced with a thin wool blanket and a pillow that had long since lost any semblance of comfort. His spine ached. His joints protested every movement. But there was nowhere else to go. In his coat pocket, Jake carried $1.35. His last meal had been 2 days ago. Stale bread purchased from a bakery's day-old bin. His stomach had stopped growling around midnight. Now it just felt hollow. Also in that pocket, pressed against his chest, was a letter. The envelope had yellowed with age, the corners soft from 3 years of being carried. The handwriting on the front belonged to a woman named Grace. His wife. His dead wife. He had never opened it. The prison warden had handed it to him the day of his release. "Your wife wrote this 3 days before she passed," the man had said, his voice carrying neither sympathy nor judgment. "Influenza took her quick." Jake had taken the letter with numb fingers. 3 years later it remained sealed. Some wounds were meant to stay closed. He pulled out the crumpled newspaper advertisement from his other pocket. The paper was old, the ink faded. "Hartwell Ranch. Widow seeks ranch hand. 15 miles west of Billings White Fence." No telephone number, no detailed description, just an address and a hope. This was his last chance. Jake knew it with the certainty of a drowning man watching the final piece of driftwood float past. If this failed, if this woman turned him away, there was nothing left. No more doors to knock on. No more pleas to make. The memory of Henderson Ranch burned in his mind like acid. 2 months ago he had worked there. Good, honest labor. Mending fences, herding cattle, fixing whatever broke. The pay was fair. The work was hard but satisfying. For 6 weeks Jake had felt something like hope again. Then Sarah Henderson had started paying attention to him. She was 28, married, pretty in a way that drew men's eyes and caused whispers in church. Her husband Derek worked the northern pastures, gone for days at a time. Sarah filled those absences with boredom and mischief. The first time she approached Jake, he was repairing a water trough. "You're awfully big," she had said, standing too close, her perfume cutting through the smell of hay and horses. "I bet you're strong too." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Jake had replied, keeping his eyes on the wood he was hammering. "Ma'am," she had laughed. "So formal. You can call me Sarah." "Mrs. Henderson suits better," Jake said, and moved to a different section of the trough. She visited him 3 more times that week. Each time her suggestions grew less subtle. Each time Jake found an excuse to be elsewhere. He had learned long ago that a man his size attracted 2 types of attention: fear or desire. Neither ended well. The night it all fell apart, Sarah had come to his bunkhouse. It was past 10. Jake had been reading by lamplight, trying to lose himself in the pages of Moby Dick. The knock on the door startled him. Sarah stood there in a thin nightgown, hair loose, eyes glassy with whiskey. "I'm lonely," she said simply, and stepped inside without invitation. "Mrs. Henderson, you need to leave," Jake said, standing quickly, the book falling to the floor. "Why?" She moved closer, swaying slightly. "Don't you find me attractive?" "That's not the point. You're married. This isn't right." She reached for him. He caught her wrists gently but firmly and guided her backward toward the door. That was the exact moment Derek Henderson appeared in the doorway. His face went from confusion to rage in the span of a heartbeat. He saw his wife half-dressed. He saw Jake's hands on her wrists. He saw what he wanted to see. "You son of a bitch!" Derek snarled and swung. Jake could have dodged, could have fought back. But fighting would only confirm the story Derek was already writing in his head. So Jake took the punch, felt his lips split, tasted blood. "It's not what you think," Jake said quietly. "Get off my property," Derek said, voice shaking with fury. "Now, tonight. If I ever see you again, I'll kill you." Sarah said nothing. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, silent. Jake packed his few belongings in 10 minutes. No final pay, no reference letter. Just the night and the road and the knowledge that Derek Henderson would spread word throughout the county. Dangerous. Predator. Can't be trusted. A man his size. People always assumed the worst. Now standing in the frozen morning outside his truck, Jake looked at the Hartwell Ranch address one more time. This widow probably wouldn't even open the door. Why would she? A stranger. A giant. A man with no references and no past worth mentioning. But he was out of options. Jake climbed onto the wagon seat, took the reins, and urged the horses forward. 15 miles west. White fence. One last chance. He drove. The road to Hartwell Ranch cut through open country, snow-covered fields, stretching endlessly on both sides. The sun rose slowly, painting the white landscape in shades of pink and gold. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Today, it just looked cold. Jake saw the fence first. White rails perfectly maintained running along both sides of the access road. Beyond it, pasture land rolled toward distant mountains. Cattle grazed in clusters, their breath steaming in the morning air. This was a working ranch, a successful one. The house came into view as he crested a small hill. Victorian architecture, 3 stories, painted white with dark green shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front. Behind it he could see a large barn, several outbuildings, and what looked like a bunkhouse in the distance. Money lived here. Lots of it. Jake's stomach tightened. A woman with a spread like this didn't need a drifter with nothing but desperation and a criminal past. She could hire anyone. Choose from a dozen qualified men with references and reputations. But he was here, and he had nowhere else to go. Jake brought the wagon to a stop near the house, climbed out, and approached the front porch. His boots sounded too loud on the wooden steps. His heart hammered in his chest. He removed his hat, smoothed his hair, tried to look presentable despite his worn clothes and 2 days without shaving. He raised his hand to knock. From inside he heard a distinct metallic sound, the slide of a pistol being racked. A round chambered. Jake froze. The door opened. The woman who stood there was not what he expected. She held a Colt .45 in her right hand, barrel pointed down but ready. Her blue eyes assessed him from boots to hat in 3 seconds flat. She was perhaps 40, maybe a touch older, with blonde hair pulled back and a face that carried both beauty and hardness in equal measure. She did not smile. "Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, not afraid, just cautious. Jake swallowed. "Ma'am, my name is Jake Sullivan. I saw your advertisement. For a ranch hand." Those blue eyes didn't blink. "That advertisement ran 3 months ago." "I know. I'm sorry. I've been looking for work. Henderson Ranch shut down their operations. I thought maybe you might still need help." "Henderson Ranch." Her expression shifted slightly. "Why did they let you go?" Jake knew this question would come. He had rehearsed various answers during the drive, half-truths, evasions. But standing here looking at this woman who held a gun like she knew how to use it, he found himself choosing honesty. "There was an incident. The owner's daughter made advances. I turned her down. Her husband found us and got the wrong idea. I was fired on the spot." "Did he get the wrong idea?" Jake met her gaze directly. "Yes, ma'am, he did." Silence stretched between them. The woman studied his face, searching for lies. Jake stood still, letting her look. He had nothing to hide. Not about that anyway. "I'm not hiring," she said finally. "I'm thinking about selling the ranch." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, his last hope crumbling before it had even formed. "Please, Mrs. Hartwell," he said, desperation creeping into his voice despite his efforts to control it. "I've been out of work for 2 months. I have nowhere else to go. I can fix fences, work cattle repair equipment, anything you need. I don't drink. I don't cause trouble. I just need a chance." Her expression remained impassive. "Where have you been staying?" The shame burned in his throat. "My truck. Sometimes the shelter in Billings when the temperature drops below 0. Something flickered in her eyes. Sympathy, perhaps, or pity. Jake couldn't tell which. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had softened just slightly. "I really can't help you." Jake's world narrowed to a single point. This door, this woman, this moment. Beyond it there was nothing. Just winter and hunger and the slow dissolution of whatever remained of his dignity. Before conscious thought could stop him, Jake dropped to one knee on the wooden porch. The sound of his knee hitting the boards echoed in the cold morning air. His hat fell from his hands. He bowed his head, a giant reduced to begging. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "I swear to God I'll work harder than any man you've ever known. I'll sleep in the barn. I'll eat table scraps. Just please don't turn me away." He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt her shock like a tangible thing. "Get up," she hissed, urgent now. "Someone might see." Jake raised his head, saw her glancing toward the road, toward the neighboring properties miles away, but still visible. He stood slowly, shame flooding through him, hot and acidic. His face burned. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he managed. "I didn't mean to. I just don't know what else to do." Margaret Hartwell stood in her doorway, gun still in hand, looking at this enormous man who had just knelt before her like a supplicant in an old story. His desperation was real. She could see it in every line of his face, hear it in every word. This was not an act. This was a man at the absolute end of his rope. And despite every sensible instinct screaming caution, despite the impropriety of a widow living alone with a male ranch hand, despite not knowing anything about this man, beyond what he claimed, Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Loneliness recognized loneliness. Grief recognized grief. "There's a bunkhouse," she heard herself say. "It hasn't been used in years. You can stay there, a few days, just while you look for other work. Understood?" Jake Sullivan's face transformed. Relief pure and overwhelming flooded his features. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I swear you won't regret this." Margaret watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, his broad back straight with new purpose. She stood in her doorway long after he disappeared inside the gun, heavy in her hand. "I already do," she whispered to no one. But she didn't call him back. The first week passed in a blur of work. Jake attacked every task with ferocious energy. The broken fence line along the southern pasture, 200 yards of rails that had weathered 3 winters without repair, took him a day and a half. He worked through lunch through the afternoon heat that pushed temperatures into the low 50s through the evening cold that dropped them back to freezing. The barn, filled with 3 years of accumulated debris and neglect, took 3 days to clean. Jake hauled out rotted hay, swept floors, organized tools that had been tossed into corners and forgotten. He found a tractor engine that had seized from lack of use, spent an entire evening taking it apart, cleaning each component, reassembling it. By morning it purred. The old water pump that fed the cattle troughs in the east pasture had been broken for 6 months. Margaret had been hauling water by wagon twice daily. Jake studied the mechanism for an hour, disappeared into the barn, emerged with tools and parts scavenged from other equipment. 4 hours later, water flowed again. He never came to the main house unless invited, never asked for extra food, never complained about the bunkhouse's thin walls or drafty windows or the mice that scurried in the corners. Margaret watched him from the kitchen window. She told herself it was supervision, making sure this stranger didn't steal or damage property or prove to be the threat every cautious voice in her head insisted he might be. But that wasn't entirely true. She watched because there was something captivating about the way Jake moved. Despite his size, he possessed an unexpected grace. His hands, massive and calloused, handled tools with surprising delicacy. He never hurried but accomplished twice what another man might in the same time. And in the evenings after dark, she could see the lamplight in the bunkhouse window. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him reading, a man who slept in his truck and begged for work but carried books. On the 3rd day it rained, not the gentle spring rain that nourished crops, but a winter storm that turned the world gray and cold and miserable. Margaret made soup thick with vegetables and beef. She looked out at the bunkhouse, saw smoke rising from its chimney, but knew the building's insulation was poor. The temperature was dropping fast. Before she could talk herself out of it, she filled a bowl, covered it with a cloth, and walked through the rain to the bunkhouse. Her knock was answered immediately. Jake stood in the doorway, surprise clear on his face. "Ma'am, I thought you might be hungry," Margaret said, holding out the bowl. "Thank you." He took it carefully as if it were made of glass. "You didn't have to do this. You've been working hard. It's the least I can do." An awkward silence settled between them. Rain drummed on the roof. Margaret's eyes drifted past Jake into the bunkhouse interior. Sparse, almost painfully so. A narrow bed with military-precise corners, a small table with a lamp, and beside the lamp, a book. "You read?" she asked, genuinely surprised. Jake followed her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. Picked that one up at a library sale in Billings. 2 cents. Margaret stepped slightly closer to see the title. Moby Dick. "That's a difficult book," she said. Jake's expression softened into something almost resembling a smile. "I like difficult things. Keeps the mind sharp when the body's tired." It was the first personal thing he had said, the first glimpse of the man beneath the desperation. Margaret found herself wanting to know more. What led a man who read Melville to sleep in his truck? What history created those shadows in his eyes? But those were questions she had no right to ask. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Well," she said, stepping back, "enjoy the soup. And tomorrow, if the rain stops, the north fence needs attention." "I'll handle it," Jake said. Then quieter, "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell, for the soup and for the chance." That night Margaret lay in her wide bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt too large, too empty. Charles had been gone 3 months, but the silence still surprised her. No footsteps in the hall, no rustling of newspaper from the study, no warm body beside her in the darkness. She was 42 years old, a widow, wealthy by any measure with land and cattle and oil wells that generated more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. The lawyer had told her she would never need to worry again, but money couldn't fill the hollow space in her chest, couldn't warm the cold sheets, couldn't answer the question that haunted her in the small hours. What now? Sell the ranch, Victoria had urged. Charles's sister, always practical, always focused on assets and investments and proper behavior, moved to Denver, joined society, find a suitable companion from among the appropriate circles. Margaret had no interest in any of it. This ranch was hers. She had worked it alongside Charles for 14 years. She knew every fence line, every pasture, every head of cattle. This was her home. She would not be driven from it by grief or loneliness or the well-meaning advice of others. But running it alone was harder than she had admitted to anyone. The physical work she could hire done. Jake was proof of that. But the decisions, the business, the constant weight of responsibility that pressed down on her every day. And beneath it all, the secret she carried. The truth she had never told anyone, not even Victoria. Charles had been unable to father children, not impotent, but sterile. The doctors had been clear, no hope of pregnancy, ever. They had never discussed it after that initial diagnosis. Charles had simply closed that door in his mind, focused on the ranch, on building wealth, on creating a legacy through land and cattle rather than bloodline. Margaret had pretended to accept it, had thrown herself into ranch work, into community activities, into anything that might distract from the ache of wanting something she could never have. Now Charles was gone, and that ache had not diminished. If anything, it had grown sharper. 42, childless, alone. The rain hammered against the windows. Margaret closed her eyes and tried to sleep. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jake was already working when Margaret emerged from the house at 7. She found him at the north fence replacing rotted posts with new ones he had cut from timber on the property. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "Good morning. You're up early." Habit. Used to have to be ready for duty by 5. It was the first reference he had made to any previous life. Margaret filed it away. They fell into a routine over the following days. Margaret would assign tasks in the morning. Jake would complete them, often going beyond what was asked. They spoke little, but the silence between them felt less awkward with each passing day. On the 5th afternoon, the temperature climbed to 80 degrees, an unseasonable warmth that had Jake removing his shirt while he worked on reinforcing the barn's roof. Margaret happened to be in the kitchen when she glanced out the window and saw him. She froze. The scars. His back was covered with them. A long, thick scar ran along his lower spine 6 inches at least. His right shoulder bore a circular mark that could only be a bullet wound. Thin white lines crisscrossed his ribs like a map of violence. "What happened to you?" The question burned in her mind, but she couldn't ask, had no right to ask. Jake's past was his own business, but the scars told a story, and it was not a simple one. Margaret felt guilt wash over her. For looking, for noticing him as something other than an employee, for the warmth that had spread through her chest when she watched him work. She was a widow of 3 months. This was inappropriate, improper, exactly the kind of behavior that would set tongues wagging if anyone knew. She stepped away from the window, heart pounding. But the image stayed with her. Those scars, that strength, the gentleness with which he handled tools and animals and broken things. "Who are you?" Jake Sullivan. Friday evening arrived with golden light and cooling temperatures. Jake knocked on the main house door just as the sun touched the horizon. Margaret answered, surprised to see him. "Ma'am," he said, hat in hand, eyes not quite meeting hers. "I just wanted to thank you for the week. I don't want to overstay my welcome. I'll move on in the morning. Did you find other work?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "No, ma'am. No references. No one wants to take the risk." Silence stretched between them. "Why?" Margaret asked. "What really happened at Henderson Ranch?" Jake's jaw tightened. He looked past her toward the darkening mountains, gathering his thoughts. "May I sit?" he asked quietly. Margaret gestured to the porch chairs. They sat the evening settling around them like a blanket. Jake turned his hat in his hands, working up to something. "Sarah Henderson made advances," he began, voice low. "Multiple times. I turned her down every time. I didn't want trouble, didn't want complications." He paused, took a breath. "One night she came to my bunkhouse, late. She'd been drinking, tried to kiss me. I pushed her away, gently but firmly. Her husband walked in at that exact moment. "And he assumed," Margaret said. "He assumed a man my size was taking advantage of his wife. People always assume the worst about me. Too big, too rough-looking, must be dangerous." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "Derek fired me on the spot. No final pay, no reference letter. Spread word through the county that I was a predator. No one would hire me after that." Margaret felt anger rise on his behalf. "That's not fair." Jake's laugh was hollow. "Fair, ma'am. I learned a long time ago that life isn't about fair. It's about who people choose to believe." The sun sank lower. Shadows lengthened across the porch. "There's something else you should know," Jake said after a long pause. His voice had changed, heavier now, weighted with something darker. Margaret waited. "Before Henderson Ranch, I was a deputy U.S. Marshal." The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's eyes widened. "What?" "For 6 years, based out of Helena. I was good at it. Brought in fugitives, served warrants, protected witnesses, did everything by the book." "What happened?" Jake's hands tightened on his hat, crushing the brim. 3 years ago, a judge's son was found dead, shot twice in the chest. They said I did it. Said it was revenge because the judge had ruled against me in a land dispute. Said I couldn't accept the decision, so I killed his boy." Margaret's breath caught. "I was arrested, put in prison. They held me for 2 years while they tried to build a case. But they couldn't prove it. Couldn't find witnesses. Couldn't find the gun. Eventually they had to let me go." "Were you innocent?" Jake turned to look at her directly for the first time. His green eyes held depths of pain that made her chest ache. "Yes, I never killed that boy. Never even knew him. But it didn't matter. My badge was gone. My reputation destroyed. And my wife." His voice broke. "My wife Grace died while I was in there. They said it was influenza. Swept through her town in 2 days. She was gone before I even knew she was sick." Tears gleamed in his eyes, catching the last light. "The warden gave me a letter when I got out. Said Grace wrote it 3 days before she died. I carry it with me every day." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a yellowed envelope. The paper was soft with age and handling. 3 years, and I still can't open it. Can't read her last words. Because once I do, she's really gone. As long as that letter stays sealed, there's still something, some connection." Margaret's own eyes burned with tears. This man, this giant who had knelt on her porch and begged for work, carried grief as deep as her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not. I've learned to keep walking, keep working, keep breathing. That's all anyone can do." The darkness had grown complete now. Stars emerged overhead, bright and cold. "You asked why no one will hire me," Jake said. "Now you know. Ex-convict, accused murderer, man with a dead wife and a past full of questions. Why would anyone take that risk?" Margaret sat very still, processing everything she had just heard. Every instinct of caution, every warning about strangers and risk and reputation screamed at her to send him away, to protect herself. But grief knew grief, and this man's pain was as real as her own. "Stay," she said. Jake turned sharply. "Ma'am, work for me. I need help, and you deserve a second chance." "Mrs. Hartwell, I don't think you understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly. Stay. Help me run this ranch. I'll pay you fair wages and provide lodging. No questions about the past. Just honest work for honest pay." Jake's face crumpled. Tears spilled over, running down his weathered cheeks. "You mean it?" "I do." For a long moment Jake couldn't speak. He just sat there, hat crushed in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Finally he managed, "Thank you. You won't regret this. I swear to you." Margaret stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning the spring calving." She went inside before he could see her own tears. Behind her, Jake Sullivan sat on the porch steps and wept. For the kindness of a stranger. for the chance he thought he'd lost forever, for Grace, whose letter still burned in his pocket. And far away on a ridge overlooking Hartwell Ranch, a man lowered his binoculars. Colton Brennan had been watching for 3 days, waiting to see if the widow would indeed hire help, hoping she would simply give up and agree to sell. This changed things. Jake Sullivan, he knew that name, knew the story. Ex-marshal framed for murder wife died in the influenza epidemic. Brennan had thought the man dead or disappeared, but here he was alive and working for Margaret Hartwell. This was problematic. Brennan turned his horse toward Home Mind, already working through the implications. He had plans for Hartwell Ranch, had invested considerable effort in making sure Margaret would have no choice but to sell. The discovery of the silver deposit under her land made those plans urgent. He could not allow interference, not from anyone, and especially not from a man who used to wear a badge. Brennan's office was dark when he arrived. He lit a lamp, poured whiskey, sat behind his massive oak desk. His foreman appeared in the doorway. "She hired the new man?" the foreman asked. "Yes, Jake Sullivan. Find out everything about him, where he's been, what he knows, and keep him away from old Henry Patterson." The foreman nodded and disappeared. Brennan sipped his whiskey, staring at the map of Montana on his wall. Red pins marked his properties. 20,000 acres. Cattle, timber, oil wells. He was the wealthiest man in 3 counties. But wealth was never enough. There was always more land to acquire, more resources to control, more power to consolidate. Hartwell Ranch sat in the middle of his empire like a missing tooth. 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, water rights to the Silver Creek, and beneath it all, a silver deposit worth millions. Charles Hartwell had discovered that deposit 6 months before his death, had commissioned a geological survey, had refused Brennan's generous offer to buy the land, so Brennan had arranged an accident. The horse, the cut saddle strap, the fall that broke Charles's neck, simple, clean, untraceable. Old Henry Patterson had seen something that day. The old blacksmith had been in the barn repairing horseshoes, but Brennan had made sure Henry understood the cost of talking. A granddaughter living in Denver. Such a shame if something happened to her. Henry had kept silent. The death was ruled accidental. Margaret was left alone with a ranch too large for one woman to manage. Everything had been proceeding according to plan, until Jake Sullivan appeared. Brennan set down his glass and leaned back in his chair. He would need to be careful. Sullivan was not some simple ranch hand. The man had law enforcement training, investigative instincts. If he started asking questions, started noticing inconsistencies, started talking to old Henry, no, that could not be allowed. Brennan made a decision. Tomorrow he would visit Father Dominic Walsh. The priest wielded considerable social influence. A few words about propriety, about a widow living alone with a strange man, about the appearance of impropriety. Let the community do the work for him. If that didn't drive Sullivan away, then more direct measures might be necessary. Brennan extinguished the lamp and sat in darkness planning. At Hartwell Ranch, Jake lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. The letter rested on the small table beside him. Grace's handwriting, her final words. He reached for it, fingers trembling, touched the paper, almost broke the seal, then withdrew his hand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some wounds needed to stay closed. Some doors needed to remain shut. The past was gone. Grace was gone. All he had was forward. And for the first time in 3 years, forward didn't look quite so empty. He had work. He had shelter. He had a chance. And he had met a woman whose loneliness mirrored his own. A woman who had shown him kindness when she had no reason to. A woman whose blue eyes held depths of sadness that called to something in his soul. Margaret Hartwell. Jake closed his eyes and tried to ignore the warmth spreading through his chest. This was employment. She was his boss, a recent widow, a woman of means and reputation. He was an ex-convict with nothing but the clothes on his back and a past full of shadows. There could be nothing between them. He repeated this to himself until sleep finally came. In the main house, Margaret stood at her bedroom window looking out toward the bunkhouse. A single lamp burned there, then went dark. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. 3 months since Charles died. 3 months of silence and emptiness, and the crushing weight of decisions she had to make alone. Tonight, for the first time, the silence felt less absolute. There was someone else on this land. Someone who understood loss. Someone who carried grief as she did. Margaret knew the danger, knew the impropriety, knew what people would say if they knew she had hired a strange man to live on her property. But she was tired of being alone. Tired of the cold bed and the empty house and the future that stretched ahead like a desert. Jake Sullivan had knelt on her porch and begged for a chance. In doing so, he had shown her something she had forgotten. Vulnerability could be strength. Desperation could be honest. And sometimes the most broken people were the ones most worth saving. Margaret stepped away from the window and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she would sleep knowing that she had made a choice, perhaps a foolish one, perhaps a dangerous one, but it was hers, and that felt like power. January turned to February. The Montana winter held firm, but inside the boundaries of Hartwell Ranch, something warmed. Jake Sullivan proved himself a dozen times over in those first weeks. He rose before dawn, worked until darkness fell, and never once asked for more than what was offered. The cattle thrived under his care. The equipment ran smoothly. Fences that had sagged for years stood straight and strong. But it was more than labor that changed the ranch. It was presence. Margaret found herself cooking larger meals, making extra coffee, preparing food she told herself was simply practical. A working man needed fuel, that was all. Except she also found herself choosing which dress to wear in the morning, running a brush through her hair one extra time, standing at the kitchen window longer than necessary, watching Jake work in the distant pastures. The evenings became something neither of them had planned. It started innocently enough. Jake had questions about the cattle rotation schedule. Margaret invited him to the porch to discuss it. They sat in separate chairs, 3 feet of careful distance between them, and talked about breeding cycles and market prices. The conversation drifted. Jake mentioned a book he had finished. Margaret had read it years ago. They discussed themes and characters while the sun set and the temperature dropped. The next evening, Jake appeared again, this time with questions about the property boundaries, another excuse to sit, to talk. By the 3rd week, the excuses became unnecessary. They simply sat together as darkness fell, speaking of small things and large things, and sometimes nothing at all. Jake told her about growing up in foster care, 7 different homes by the time he turned 16, never adopted because of his size. People were afraid he would be violent, uncontrollable, dangerous. "I was 12 years old and already 6 feet tall," he said, one cold evening breath misting in the air. "The social worker told me I was intimidating, me, a child, intimidating." Margaret heard the old pain beneath the words. "I learned to make myself small," Jake continued, "kept my head down, spoke quietly, tried not to take up space, but it never mattered. People saw what they wanted to see." "What did you want?" Margaret asked. "As a child." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "A place to belong, that's all. Just somewhere that felt like home." Margaret understood that longing with painful clarity. She told him about her marriage to Charles, how it had been good but not passionate, comfortable but not exciting. They had built something together, this ranch, this life, but there had always been distance between them, a careful politeness that never quite became intimacy. "He was a good man," she said, "honest, hard-working. He provided well." "But," Jake asked gently. Margaret struggled to articulate what she had never said aloud. "But I was lonely even when he was alive. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Jake said. "It makes you human." She appreciated that he did not offer false comfort, did not tell her she should feel grateful for what she had. He simply acknowledged the truth. Some marriages were partnerships, some were conveniences, and some were simply 2 people existing in parallel, never quite touching. The vulnerability of these conversations created something between them, a connection that grew stronger with each passing evening. Margaret began to notice things. The way Jake's eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. The careful way he moved, always conscious of his size. The gentleness with which he handled everything, as if the world might break under rough treatment. And she noticed the way he looked at her. Brief glances that carried weight. His attention when she spoke, as if her words mattered more than anything else. It was intoxicating and terrifying. One evening in mid-February, the air held a rare warmth. Spring teased at the edges of winter. Jake sat on the porch steps, Margaret in her chair above him. The sky blazed pink and gold, beautiful enough to make her chest ache. Jake turned to look at her, and his expression held something she had not seen before. Not quite hope, not quite fear, something trembling between them. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." He took a breath. "Would you ever see past a man like me, someone with my history, my past?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spread outward, touching everything. Margaret's heart began to race. She understood what he was really asking, the question beneath the question. "I should go inside," she said, standing too quickly. "It's getting cold. Good night, Jake." She fled before he could respond. Inside, she leaned against the closed door, breathing hard. Her hands trembled. What was she doing? This was her employee, a man she had known for barely 2 months, a man with a criminal record and a past full of shadows. And yet... That night Margaret could not sleep. She lay in her wide bed, staring at the ceiling, Jake's question echoing endlessly. Would you ever see past a man like me? The truth, the one she could barely admit to herself, was that she already had. She saw past his size to the gentleness underneath, past his poverty to the dignity with which he carried himself, past his scarred body to the wounded soul. She saw him, really saw him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. While Margaret wrestled with growing feelings, forces gathered against them. 50 miles away in a town called Copper Ridge, Colton Brennan sat across from Father Dominic Walsh. The priest's office was austere, a crucifix on the wall, a plain wooden desk, no luxuries. Father Dominic believed in the appearance of humility even if the reality proved more complex. "The widow is becoming a problem," Brennan said, swirling whiskey in a crystal glass. "She refuses to sell." Father Dominic folded his hands on the desk. He was 62, gray-haired, with the kind of face that inspired trust. Grandfatherly, wise, completely false. "Grief makes people irrational," the priest said. "Give her time." "I don't have time," Brennan snapped. "The silver deposit under her land won't wait. Every day she delays is money lost. My money." "What do you suggest?" Brennan leaned forward. "Social pressure. You're a man of God. The community listens to you. Margaret Hartwell is living alone with a strange man, an ex-convict. Make her uncomfortable." Father Dominic considered this. "You want me to preach against her?" "Not directly. Just mention the importance of propriety, the vulnerability of widows to manipulation, the duty of good Christians to guide those who have lost their way." A slow smile spread across the priest's face. "I understand." "Good." Brennan stood. "And Father, when she finally sells, your church will receive a very generous donation. New pews, new roof, whatever you need." "The Lord's work requires resources," Father Dominic said piously. They shook hands. Two men of influence making deals in darkness. After Brennan left, Father Dominic sat alone thinking. He had known about the silver deposit for months. Brennan had told him, brought him into the conspiracy, promised him a percentage of the profits. All Father Dominic had to do was use his position to influence public opinion. It was, he told himself, for the greater good. The church needed funds. The community needed guidance. And Margaret Hartwell, living in sin with that enormous brute, needed to be reminded of proper behavior. The fact that it would also make him wealthy was merely a fortunate side effect. Father Dominic began composing his sermon for Sunday. Late February brought an unexpected warm spell. Temperatures climbed into the 50s, snow melted, the ground turned muddy. Jake worked on expanding the cattle operation, carefully assessing which pastures could support larger herds. Margaret handled the business side, negotiating with buyers, reviewing contracts. They made a good team. Her sharp mind for numbers and strategy, his practical knowledge of ranching and animal husbandry. Together, they began to see possibilities neither had noticed alone. The ranch could grow, could thrive, could become something more than it had been. Late one afternoon, Jake removed his shirt while repairing the barn roof. The day had turned hot. Sweat soaked through the fabric. Inside the kitchen, Margaret happened to glance out the window. She stopped, stared. His back was a map of violence. Scars layered upon scars. The long one down his spine. The bullet wound on his shoulder. Thin white lines across his ribs, but also strength. Muscles that moved with fluid power. A body that had endured terrible things and survived. Margaret felt heat rise through her body. Guilt followed immediately. She was a widow of barely 4 months, watching her ranch hand with desire. This was wrong, inappropriate, exactly the kind of behavior that would confirm every suspicion about her character. She forced herself to turn away from the window, but the image stayed with her. Those scars, that strength, the combination of vulnerability and power. Who hurt you? Jake Sullivan. And why do I want so badly to erase those wounds? Sunday morning arrived cold and bright. Margaret dressed carefully for church. Navy dress modest and appropriate. Pearl earrings, hat with a small brim. She had not missed a Sunday service in 15 years. Would not start now despite the whispers she knew followed her everywhere. The church was small but well maintained, white clapboard siding, tall steeple, pews that seated perhaps 80 people. The community gathered here weekly ostensibly to worship, but also to see and be seen, to exchange news and gossip and judgment. Margaret took her usual seat, 3rd row from the front. She felt eyes on her back, heard the whispers that cut off when she turned her head. Father Dominic entered from the vestry, his vestments crisp and white. The service began with familiar hymns and prayers. Margaret went through the motions, standing and sitting and reciting the words she had memorized years ago. Then came the sermon. Father Dominic stood in the pulpit, looking out over his congregation with benevolent concern. "My dear brothers and sisters," he began, voice carrying easily through the small space, "today I wish to speak to you about vigilance, about protecting the vulnerable among us from those who would take advantage." Margaret's stomach tightened. "A woman alone is particularly vulnerable," the priest continued. "Grief clouds judgment, loneliness creates desperation, and there are those who would exploit such weakness for their own gain." Several heads turned subtly toward Margaret. "We must be vigilant against sin in our community, against impropriety, against the appearance of evil, for it is written, 'Abstain from all appearance of evil.'" Father Dominic's eyes found Margaret's, held them. A widow living alone with a man not her husband, a stranger with unknown character. This creates scandal. It invites speculation. It sets a poor example for our young people. Heat flooded Margaret's face. She wanted to stand, to walk out, to tell this sanctimonious hypocrite exactly what she thought of his thinly veiled attack, but she sat frozen, enduring. "It is our duty as Christians," Father Dominic concluded, "to guide those who have lost their way back to righteousness, to speak truth even when it is uncomfortable, to protect reputation and morality even against those who would abandon both." The service ended. Margaret did not wait for the fellowship hour. She walked directly to her truck, spine rigid, face burning. Mrs. Henderson intercepted her in the parking area. "Margaret, dear," the woman said, false sweetness dripping from every word, "we're all so concerned about you." "Are you?" It was not a question. "Living alone with that man, that enormous creature. People are talking, dear. Surely you understand." "What I understand," Margaret said coldly, "is that my living arrangements are my own business." Mrs. Henderson's smile froze. "Of course. I'm just thinking of your reputation. Your dear Charles would want you to be careful about appearances." "My dear Charles is dead," Margaret said, voice sharp as broken glass. "And I will run my ranch and my life as I see fit. Now, if you'll excuse me." She climbed into her carriage and drove away, hands shaking as she held the reins. The damage was done. Father Dominic had made his position clear. The community would follow his lead as they always did. Margaret Hartwell was now officially a woman of questionable morals. She drove home through tears of rage and humiliation. Jake was working in the east pasture when she arrived. He saw her truck read something in the way she parked and came immediately. "Mrs. Hartwell, what happened?" "Nothing," she said, climbing out. "Just church." But her red eyes told a different story. Jake waited. Margaret took a shaking breath. "Father Dominic preached against me, against us, said I was living in sin, that you were taking advantage of my grief. The whole congregation heard it." Jake's face darkened. "I'll leave. Today. I won't let you suffer because of me." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "You're not the problem. Their judgment is the problem. But if my being here causes you pain, your being here is the only thing keeping me sane." Margaret's voice broke. "Don't you understand? This ranch, this life, it's all I have. And it's too much to carry alone. I need help. I need you." The words hung between them, meaning more than she had intended. Jake stepped closer. "What do you need, Margaret?" It was the first time he had used her first name. The intimacy of it sent shivers down her spine. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know anymore." They stood in the afternoon sun, two lonely people drawn together by forces neither fully understood. "I should go inside," Margaret said finally. "There's work to do." She walked away before her resolve could crumble completely. That evening, storm clouds gathered. By nightfall, rain fell in sheets. Margaret sat in her study trying to focus on ledgers, but the numbers blurred. Her mind kept returning to Father Dominic's sermon, to Mrs. Henderson's false concern, to the whispers that would now follow her everywhere. A knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find Jake standing in the downpour, soaked through, shivering. "The bunkhouse roof is leaking," he said. "Bad. I can fix it tomorrow, but tonight it's uninhabitable." "Come inside," Margaret said. "You'll stay in the guest room." Jake hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not a good idea." "Why not?" "Because—" Jake said, water dripping from his hair, his clothes pooling on her porch. "Because I'm in love with you." Thunder crashed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Margaret stared at him, heart hammering. "What?" Jake stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. Water puddled at his feet. His green eyes held hers with painful intensity. "I'm in love with you, Margaret Hartwell," he said, voice low and rough. "I've been trying to fight it for 2 months, trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself it's just gratitude or loneliness or anything but what it really is." He took a shaking breath. "But I can't lie anymore. Not to you. Not to myself. I love you. I love your strength and your intelligence and the way you look at the mountains when you think no one's watching. I love your kindness and your stubbornness and the sadness in your eyes that matches my own." Margaret could not breathe, could not think, could only stand there as this enormous man laid his heart at her feet. "I know it's wrong," Jake continued. "I have nothing to offer you. You could have any man in Montana, respectable men, men who haven't been in prison or lived in their trucks or begged on your porch." Tears streamed down his face, mixing with rainwater. "But I can't help how I feel, and I can't stay here pretending anymore, so I'll leave. Tomorrow. Tonight even. I'll go, and you'll never have to see me again. I won't cause you any more trouble." He turned toward the door. "Wait," Margaret said. Jake stopped, did not turn around. "You think you're the only one fighting these feelings?" Her voice shook. "You think I haven't noticed? Haven't felt it too?" Jake turned slowly. Margaret's hands trembled. "I'm terrified, Jake. Terrified of what people will say, of what it means, of wanting something society says I shouldn't have. Charles has been dead 4 months, 4 months, and I'm standing here with feelings for another man." "I understand," Jake said quietly. "No, you don't." Margaret stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You don't understand that every time I see you, my heart does something it hasn't done in 20 years. You don't understand that I listen for your footsteps, that I make excuses to be near you, that I watch you from the window and feel things I thought I had forgotten." She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold rain. "You don't understand that I'm falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." Jake's breath caught. "Margaret." "What do you want from me, Jake Sullivan?" The question trembled in the air between them. Jake reached up slowly, giving her time to move away. His hand cupped her cheek rough and gentle at once. "I want you to not be lonely anymore," he said softly. "Then help me," Margaret whispered. "Help me not be lonely." Jake's other hand came up to cradle her face. He bent slowly, carefully, as if approaching something precious and fragile. Their lips met. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. Then Margaret's hands came up to grip his wet shirt and pull him closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. Years of loneliness poured out of both of them. Grief and want and need tangled together until neither could say where one ended and the other began. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is madness," Margaret said. "I know," Jake replied. "People will destroy me for this." "I know." "I don't care," Margaret said, surprised to find it was true. "Let them talk. Let them judge. I'm done living for their approval." She took Jake's hand. "Come upstairs. Get out of those wet clothes. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." They climbed the stairs together, hand in hand, crossing a line from which there would be no return. That night Margaret learned what passion felt like, what it meant to be touched with reverence and desire in equal measure. Jake's hands, so large and scarred, moved over her body with exquisite tenderness. And when they finally lay together in the darkness, tangled in sheets, and each other, Margaret felt something she had not felt in years: peace. Jake held her close, his heart beating steady beneath her ear. "I never thought I'd have this again," he whispered. "After Grace, after everything, I thought I was done." "So did I," Margaret said. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the storm still raging outside, but inside finding shelter. The next 2 weeks existed in a bubble of stolen happiness. Publicly they maintained the fiction: employer and employee, careful distance, professional behavior. Privately, they were lovers. Jake moved his few belongings into the main house but kept the bunkhouse looking occupied in case anyone checked. They cooked dinner together, read by the fire, made love with the desperate intensity of people who knew how fragile happiness could be. Margaret felt alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. Her body woke up. Her heart opened. The future which had seemed so bleak and empty now held promise, but the outside world was not content to leave them alone. The following Sunday, Father Dominic's sermon grew more pointed. "There are those among us who have lost their way," he intoned from the pulpit, "who have abandoned propriety for selfish desire, who place personal gratification above community standards and moral behavior." More heads turned toward Margaret. More whispers followed her out. The ladies' auxiliary met without inviting her for the first time in 10 years. The shopkeeper in town served her with cold politeness that bordered on rudeness. Anonymous notes began appearing, slipped under her door, left on her truck windshield. "Shame on you." "Whore." "Your husband is turning in his grave." Margaret burned them all, but they left marks nonetheless. Jake saw her pain and offered again to leave. Each time she refused. "I won't let them win," she said fiercely. "I won't let their narrow minds dictate my life." But the pressure mounted, and Colton Brennan, watching from a distance, knew exactly what he was doing. The first week of March brought Victoria Hartwell. Margaret heard the car before she saw it, the distinctive sound of a Lincoln sedan, expensive and out of place on ranch roads. Victoria emerged, dressed in a tailored suit, leather gloves, pearls. Every inch the successful attorney, every inch Charles's sister. "Margaret," she said, voice cool, "we need to talk." They sat in the study, Victoria perched on the edge of a chair, Margaret behind her desk like a barrier. "You've gone mad," Victoria said without preamble. "Living here with that man, do you know what people are saying? I can imagine." "I don't think you can. The county is scandalized. Father Dominic is calling you a fallen woman. The Henderson family is demanding you be removed from every social organization." "I don't care about social organizations." Victoria's voice rose. "You should. You have Charles's name to protect, our family's reputation, and instead you're throwing it all away for what, a ranch hand, an ex-convict." Anger flared in Margaret's chest. "His name is Jake Sullivan, and yes, he was in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He was framed." "So he says. Did you verify that? Did you check his story? Or did you just believe him because he's handsome and strong and you're lonely?" The words struck like blows. "Get out," Margaret said quietly. "No." Victoria leaned forward. "I'm your family. I'm trying to protect you. Can't you see he's using you, taking advantage of your grief?" "He's not." "Then what is he doing?" "Margaret, be honest. A man appears at your door with nothing, begs for work. You give it to him. And now you're sleeping with him. What does that look like to anyone with sense?" Margaret stood. "I said, get out." Victoria stood as well. "I have a buyer for this ranch, Colton Brennan. He's offering $1.2 million. Cash. Take it. Sell this place. Move to Denver with me. Start over somewhere people don't know about your mistakes." "No." "Why not?" "To stay here with your lover." "Because this is my home." Margaret's voice shook with fury. "This ranch is mine. I built it with Charles. I know every acre. And I'm not giving it up because small-minded people can't accept that a widow might want to be happy." Victoria's expression turned cold. "Then you leave me no choice. If you won't protect your reputation, I'll have to protect our families. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what's happening here. The affair, the impropriety, everything." She walked to the door, paused. "People already think you're having an affair, Margaret. Now I'm going to prove it. And when your name is completely ruined, when no one in Montana will speak to you, maybe then you'll see reason." Victoria left. The sound of her car faded into the distance. Margaret stood alone in the study, shaking. Everything was falling apart. The community had turned against her. Now family as well. She walked outside, needing air, needing space. Found Jake in the barn repairing tack. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Victoria came. She's going to tell everyone. Make it public. Destroy my reputation completely." Jake set down the leather he was working on. "Then maybe it's time I left. Really left. If I'm gone, the gossip stops. You can rebuild." "No." Margaret's voice was steel. "I'm tired of running. Tired of living by other people's rules." She looked at Jake, this man who made her feel alive, who understood her loneliness, who loved her despite having every reason not to trust love again. "I'm tired of being afraid," she said. That evening, as the sun set, Margaret stood at the bunkhouse door. Jake answered, surprise crossing his features. "We need to talk," she said. Inside, in that sparse room where this had all begun, they faced each other. "People are talking," Margaret said. "About us. It's getting worse. Victoria's making threats. Father Dominic is preaching against me. The whole county thinks I'm a scandal." "I know." Jake's voice was heavy. "That's why I should go. I won't let you suffer for my presence." "Are you firing me?" He tried to keep his tone light, but she heard the pain underneath. "No." Margaret took a breath. "I'm asking you to marry me." Jake stared. "What?" "Or rather, I'm hoping you'll ask me. Because I can't do this anymore, Jake. Can't pretend we're employer and employee when we both know the truth. Can't live in secret hiding what I feel." She stepped closer. "I love you. I love you in ways I never loved Charles, in ways I didn't know I could love. And I know it's too soon. I know people will say terrible things. I know you have nothing in terms of money or status, but I don't care about any of that." Tears filled her eyes. I just want to not be lonely anymore. And you make me feel less alone than I've ever felt in my life." Jake stood frozen, processing her words. Then slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee, on that same spot where he had begged for work 4 months ago, where he had humiliated himself out of desperation. This time he knelt with dignity, with purpose. "Margaret Hartwell," he said, looking up at her, "I have nothing to offer you but these hands, this heart, and a promise. I will work for you every day of my life. I will protect you, honor you, stand beside you against anyone who comes against us." His voice grew stronger. "I will love you with everything I am, and God willing, I will give you the family you've always wanted, the children Charles couldn't give you." Margaret's breath caught. He knew. Somehow he knew about Charles's sterility, the secret she had never told anyone. "How did you—" "I see how you look at children in town," Jake said gently. "How you touch baby clothes in the store window when you think no one's watching. I recognize loss when I see it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple silver band. "I bought this 3 weeks ago. Been carrying it, waiting for the courage to ask. It's not much, not gold, not diamonds, but it's real, like what I feel for you. Marry me, Margaret. Let me be your husband. Let me stand with you against the world. Let me give you everything you've been denied." Margaret pulled him to his feet. "Yes, God help me, yes." They kissed, sealing the promise. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the ridge. Colton Brennan's foreman with binoculars and a growing sense of urgency. He rode immediately to Brennan's ranch. "They're getting married," he reported. "Next week, from what I overheard." Brennan's face went dark. He stood from his desk, walked to the window, stared out at his empire. "Then we accelerate the plan," he said quietly. "It's time old Henry Patterson told the truth about Charles Hartwell's death. Past time." He turned to his foreman. "Bring Henry here, tonight. Use whatever persuasion necessary." "What about the granddaughter?" "Tell him if he doesn't cooperate, accidents happen, even in Denver." The foreman nodded and left. Brennan poured Whiskey Mind, already working through the next steps. If he could expose Charles Hartwell's death as murder, if he could create enough scandal around the ranch, Margaret would have no choice but to sell. And Jake Sullivan, that interfering ex-marshal, would be far too busy defending his new wife to investigate anything. Everything was coming together. Margaret and Jake married the following Friday in the Billings courthouse. No guests, no flowers, no celebration, just two people speaking vows that meant everything. The judge, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, smiled at them. "Do you, Margaret Ann Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Margaret's voice rang clear. "And do you, Jacob Thomas Sullivan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jake kissed her gently, reverently. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. They signed the papers, paid the fee, walked out into the March sunshine as husband and wife. The drive back to the ranch should have been peaceful. Instead, dread settled in Margaret's stomach. They arrived home to find the telephone ringing, and ringing, and ringing. Margaret answered. Victoria's voice exploded through the line. "You married him. You actually married him. Margaret, you've lost your mind. I'm contesting this marriage. You were coerced, manipulated. He's after your money." Victoria, "Don't. I'm done trying to help you. You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences." The line went dead. It rang again immediately. Father Dominic this time. "Mrs. Hartwell, or should I say Mrs. Sullivan, this is highly inappropriate. Marrying so soon after your husband's death, and to a man of such questionable character. The church cannot support this." Click, ring, Mrs. Henderson. "We're removing you from the Ladies' Auxiliary, Margaret. Your behavior is a disgrace to decent women everywhere." Click, ring, 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 15 calls, 20, each one carrying judgment, condemnation, shock. Margaret finally unplugged the telephone. In the sudden silence, she and Jake looked at each other. "I'm sorry," Margaret said. "I didn't think it would be this bad." Jake pulled her close. "I did. But I don't care what they think. I care about you, about us. That's all." "I'm starting not to care either," Margaret whispered against his chest. But outside forces were gathering, and the worst was yet to come. That night, 11 o'clock, desperate pounding shook the front door. Jake grabbed his rifle. Margaret followed him downstairs. Through the window they saw old Henry Patterson, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, terror written across his face. Jake threw open the door. "Henry, what happened?" "They're after me." The old man stumbled inside. "Brennan's men. You have to help me." Margaret locked the door behind him, heart racing. Henry collapsed into a chair, breathing hard. Jake brought water. Margaret found bandages for the bleeding. "Tell us what happened," Jake said. Henry looked up at them with haunted eyes. "I have to tell you the truth. About Charles. About what really happened." Margaret's blood turned to ice. "It wasn't an accident," Henry said. "His death. It wasn't an accident." Margaret's world stopped. The words hung in the air, impossible and yet terrifyingly real. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. "What did you say?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Henry's face crumpled with guilt and grief. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I should have told you months ago." Old Henry Patterson sat in Margaret's parlor hands, trembling around a glass of water. Blood had dried on his temple where Brennan's men had struck him. His 78 years showed in every line of his weathered face. Jake stood by the window, rifle ready, watching the darkness beyond. Margaret sat across from Henry, waiting for him to find his voice. "I should have spoken up months ago," Henry said finally. "Should have told the truth when it mattered. But I was afraid. God forgive me, I was a coward." "Tell us now," Margaret said gently, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Henry took a shaking breath. "Charles wasn't thrown from his horse because the animal spooked. He was thrown because someone cut the saddle girth strap, cut it halfway through so it would break during a hard ride." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret gripped the arm of her chair. "You're saying someone murdered my husband?" "Yes." Henry's voice broke. "And I saw who did it. I was in the barn that morning early repairing horseshoes. Brennan's foreman came in. Didn't see me in the back stall. I watched him take Charles's saddle, examine the girth strap, then use a knife to cut it part way through. Not all the way, just enough that it would fail under stress." Jake turned from the window. "Why? Why would Brennan want Charles dead?" "The silver," Henry said. "There's a silver deposit under this land, massive one. Charles discovered it 6 months before he died. Had a geological survey done. Showed me the results. Worth millions, he said. Maybe tens of millions." Margaret's mind reeled. Silver Charles had never mentioned silver. "Brennan found out somehow," Henry continued. "Offered to buy the ranch. Generous offer, too. But Charles refused. Said this land was for his future children, for the family he hoped to have." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Charles had never stopped hoping, even knowing it was impossible. When Charles wouldn't sell, Brennan decided to remove the obstacle. Make it look like an accident. A tragic fall from a spooked horse. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jake's voice was hard. Shame contorted Henry's face. "Brennan found out I'd seen. Don't know how, but he did. Came to my shop 3 days after the funeral. Said my granddaughter Sarah lives in Denver. Said accidents happen in cities. Said she might get hurt if I talked to anyone about what I saw." The old man wept. "She's all I got left in this world. My daughter's only child. I couldn't risk her, so I kept silent. Let everyone believe it was an accident. Let Margaret grieve alone while I carried the truth like a stone." Margaret crossed to him, knelt beside his chair. "Henry, you were protecting your family. I understand. But tonight," Henry said, "tonight Brennan's men came for me. Said he wants me to sign a statement that Charles was drunk that morning, that his death was his own fault. They want to destroy his reputation along with everything else." "And you refused," Jake said. I refused. So they beat me. Would have killed me, I think, except I got away. Ran through the back alleys, hid in shadows. Made it here because I knew you needed to know the truth. Jake moved to the door, checked the locks. They'll come looking for him. As if in answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the night. Multiple horses, coming fast. Jake extinguished the lamps, moved to the window, peered through a crack in the curtains. 8 men on horseback circling the house. In the moonlight he recognized several of them. Brennan's ranch hands, hired muscle. One of them called out, "Send out the old man. This doesn't concern you, Mrs. Sullivan." Jake's jaw clenched. They knew she had married, knew her new name, which meant they had been watching closely. "What do we do?" Margaret whispered. Jake checked his rifle, verified the ammunition. "We don't give them what they want." He called back through the closed door. "Henry Patterson is under my protection. You boys should ride home before someone gets hurt." Laughter answered him. Then gunfire. Windows shattered. Glass exploded inward. Margaret screamed, dropped to the floor. Henry crawled behind the heavy oak desk. Jake returned fire. 2 shots carefully aimed. One man cried out, clutching his shoulder. Another's horse reared, throwing its rider. The attack paused. "Last chance," the voice called. "Give us the old man or we burn you out." "Come and take him," Jake shouted back. More gunfire, but the men kept their distance now, circling, testing defenses. The siege had begun. Dawn broke gray and cold. The gunmen had not left. They maintained a loose perimeter around the house, out of rifle range, waiting. Inside, Jake inventoried their situation. 3 rifles, 2 pistols, ammunition enough for maybe 2 days of sustained fighting if they were careful. Food and water for a week, but they couldn't stay barricaded forever. "We need to get word to the law," Margaret said. "To a U.S. Marshal." "Nearest marshal is in Helena," Jake said. 3 days' ride. "Then someone has to go." "Not me. I won't leave you here alone." They were trapped, and Brennan knew it. Around mid-morning, a single rider approached, white flag tied to a stick. Jake watched through the window. "It's a woman." Margaret looked. Her stomach dropped. "It's Victoria." Victoria Hartwell rode through the line of gunmen. They parted for her, let her pass. She dismounted at the front porch, tied her horse, walked to the door. "Margaret," she called. "It's me. Let me in." Jake looked to Margaret. "Could be a trick?" "No." Margaret moved to the door. "I know my sister-in-law. She's many things, but she wouldn't lead an attack." Margaret unlocked the door. Victoria entered quickly. Jake locked it behind her. Victoria took in the scene. Shattered windows, bullet holes in the walls, old Henry bleeding and terrified. Margaret and Jake armed and exhausted. "My God," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it had gone this far." "What are you doing here?" Margaret demanded. Victoria's composure, usually so perfect, crumbled. "I came to apologize, to tell you I was wrong about Jake, about everything." She pulled a document from her coat. "But now I have something more important. This is a signed confession, from Brennan's foreman, the man who cut Charles's saddle strap." Jake took the paper, scanned it quickly. Legal language, but clear enough. A confession of murder. "How did you get this?" he asked. "I went to see Brennan last night, to tell him I'd convinced you to sell, except I hadn't. I just wanted to see what he'd say." Victoria's voice shook. "He bragged about it, about killing Charles, about the silver deposit, about manipulating the whole county through Father Dominic. He thought I was his ally, thought I cared more about money than family." Tears streamed down her face. "I got his foreman drunk afterward, got him talking. Had a notary waiting in the next room to witness and document everything he said. It's all here, signed and legal." She looked at Margaret. "I'm so sorry. I was focused on inheritance and reputation and all the wrong things. Charles was my brother, and I let his murderer walk free while I pressured you to sell him the land." Margaret stared at the confession, then at Victoria. "Why now? Why help us?" "Because you were right. About everything. About choosing your own life. About not caring what others think." I spent so long being proper and respectable that I forgot what actually matters." She gestured toward the gunman outside. "And when I saw Brennan's men coming here, when I realized what he was planning, I knew I had to choose. Money or family, reputation or truth." Victoria took Margaret's hands. "I choose family. I choose truth, even if it means destroying my own reputation alongside yours." Margaret embraced her sister-in-law. For the first time since Charles died, she felt she was not alone in grief. "We still have a problem," Jake said. "That confession is only useful if we can get it to someone who can act on it, and we're surrounded." Victoria straightened. "I can get through. They'll let me pass. I'll ride to Helena, bring back the U.S. Marshal." "It's 3 days there and back," Jake said. "Can we hold out that long?" "We'll have to," Margaret said. Victoria prepared to leave. At the door she paused. "Margaret, I'm glad you married him. He makes you happy in ways Charles never could. I see that now." She hugged her sister-in-law once more, then mounted her horse. The gunmen let her pass without incident. Jake watched her ride away, confession tucked safely in her saddlebag. Now we wait. 3 days, 72 hours, an eternity. The first day passed in tense vigilance. Brennan's men made no direct assault, but they didn't leave either. They built fires, made camp, settled in for a long wait. Occasionally they would fire shots at the house. Not serious attempts to breach defenses, just harassment, keeping the pressure on. Jake and Margaret took turns watching, sleeping in shifts, eating cold food because cooking smoke might draw fire. Old Henry stayed in the study, guilt-eating at him. "This is my fault. I should have spoken up months ago." "You were protecting your granddaughter," Margaret said. "Any of us would have done the same." Night fell, then dawn. Day 2. The second day was harder. Exhaustion set in, nerves frayed. Water ran lower than Jake liked. Around noon, Brennan himself appeared. He rode in on a magnificent black stallion dressed in expensive clothes, looking every inch the wealthy rancher, the epitome of success and power. Jake watched him through the window, hatred burning cold in his chest. Brennan called out, voice carrying easily. "Mrs. Sullivan, Margaret, let's be reasonable about this." "Go to hell, Brennan," Jake shouted back. Now, no need for hostility. I'm a businessman. I'm prepared to make an offer. We're not selling, not the land. I'm offering to let you live. You, your new husband, and old Henry. Just walk away, leave Montana, never come back, and I'll let you go unharmed." Silence from the house. "Think about it," Brennan continued. "You can't win this. You're outnumbered. Eventually you'll run out of food or water or ammunition. When that happens, my men will come in, and I can't guarantee your safety then." "You murdered my husband," Margaret called out, her voice steel. Brennan laughed. "Prove it. Who'll believe the word of an old man and an ex-convict over mine? I'm the most respected rancher in Montana. Father Dominic will testify to my character." "We have proof," Jake said. A pause. Then Brennan's voice hardened. "No, you don't. Victoria took the confession, yes. Very clever. But she'll never make it to Helena. I have men on every road. She'll be intercepted, and that confession will disappear." Cold dread settled in Jake's stomach. What if Brennan was right? "Last chance," Brennan said. "Leave Montana or die here. Your choice." "We're not leaving," Margaret said firmly. Brennan shrugged. "Then you've chosen death. So be it." He rode away. The circle of gunmen tightened. That night was the darkest. Margaret and Jake sat together by candlelight, hands clasped. "If Victoria doesn't make it," Margaret said quietly, "if they catch her." "Then we go down fighting," Jake finished. "I'm not sorry," she said, "for any of it, for marrying you, for choosing this, even if it ends badly." Jake pulled her close. "These months with you have been the happiest of my life, even with everything. If this is all we get, it was worth it." They kissed, held each other, found comfort in physical closeness as the night stretched on. Day 3 dawned bright and cold. By noon their water was nearly gone, ammunition running low. No sign of Victoria, no sign of rescue. Brennan's men began preparing for a final assault. Jake could see them organizing, checking weapons, drawing closer. "This is it," he said to Margaret. "When they come, you and Henry stay down. I'll hold them as long as I can." "We fight together," Margaret said. "I won't hide while you die for me." She picked up Charles's old rifle, checked the ammunition. Her hands were steady. The gunmen advanced. Jake took position at the front window, Margaret at the side. Henry crouched behind the desk loading spare magazines. The attackers were 50 yards away, 40, 30. Jake sighted down his rifle, prepared to fire. Then from the east a sound, distant at first, then growing louder. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats. Everyone froze, listened. Over the ridge came riders, 12 of them. Leading was Victoria, and beside her a man wearing a silver star, U.S. Marshal Thomas Grant. Behind them 11 deputy marshals, all armed, all grim-faced. The marshal rode directly to Brennan's men. His voice carried across the distance, clear and authoritative. "Throw down your weapons. You're all under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." Brennan's hired guns looked at each other. Outnumbered now, outgunned, they dropped their rifles. The marshals moved in efficiently, disarming them, putting them in handcuffs. Marshal Grant approached the house. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, old Henry, you can come out now. You're safe." Jake opened the door cautiously, verified the marshals were genuine, then stepped out, rifle lowered. Margaret and Henry followed. Victoria dismounted, ran to Margaret, embraced her. "I made it. I rode through the night, changed horses twice. The marshal believed me when he saw the confession." Marshal Grant was a man in his 50s, gray-haired with eyes that had seen everything. He looked at Jake with recognition. "Jake Sullivan, heard you got out of prison, heard the charges were dropped." "Marshal Grant," Jake said with respect. "We'll talk later. Right now, I need to arrest Colton Brennan." They rode in force to Brennan's ranch. Massive spread, ostentatious house, everything money could buy. Brennan emerged onto his porch, saw the marshals, and his face went white. "Colton Brennan," Marshal Grant said, "you're under arrest for the murder of Charles Hartwell, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, intimidation of witnesses, and about 6 other charges I'll think of on the ride back to Helena." "You can't prove anything," Brennan snarled. Grant held up the confession. "Your foreman disagrees. Signed statement. Notarized. Details everything. The cut saddle strap. Your orders. The threats against Henry Patterson's granddaughter." Brennan's composure shattered. "That's coerced, inadmissible. We'll let a judge decide that." Grant signaled his deputies. They moved forward, put Brennan in handcuffs. As they led him away, Brennan screamed threats and curses, promised revenge, swore he'd be free within a week. But they were empty words from a broken man. The marshals also arrested Father Dominic Walsh, whose involvement was documented in the confession. The priest went silently, head down, all his pious authority stripped away. By sunset, both men were locked in the Helena jail awaiting trial. The trial came 3 months later. The territorial courthouse in Helena was packed. Everyone wanted to see the mighty Colton Brennan brought low. The prosecution presented the foreman's confession. Old Henry testified about what he saw. Geologists confirmed the silver deposit. Financial records showed Brennan's attempts to purchase Hartwell land. The defense tried to discredit everyone, called Henry a senile old man, called the foreman a liar, suggested Jake had orchestrated everything as revenge for his own imprisonment. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Colton Brennan to hang. Father Dominic received 20 years in prison for conspiracy and fraud. When the verdict was read, Margaret sat between Jake and Victoria, holding both their hands. Justice. Finally. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Marshal Grant pulled Jake aside. "You did good work here, Sullivan, protecting those folks, standing up when it mattered." "I just did what was right," Jake said. "That's what I always said about you." Grant paused. "I knew you were innocent back then. The murder they pinned on you. I tried to prove it, but the judge had too much power. Too many connections." Jake's throat tightened. "You believed me." "Always did. You were a good marshal. Best tracker I ever worked with. That judge's son was killed by someone else, and we both know it. But the system failed you." Grant extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserved better." They shook hands, a measure of vindication even if it came too late. Margaret and Jake returned to Hartwell Ranch in early summer. The land looked different now, not just because the threat had passed, but because it truly belonged to them. No shadows, no danger, just earth and sky and possibility. They fell into new rhythms, working together, planning for the future. The silver deposit would be mined carefully, sustainably. The money would secure their future and fund improvements to the ranch. But the real wealth was simpler. One morning in late July, Margaret woke feeling nauseous. She dismissed it as something she ate. But it happened again the next day, and the next. A week later, the doctor confirmed what she had suspected. Her monthly cycle had stopped. The morning sickness persisted. The fatigue was overwhelming. Pregnant. She was pregnant. At 42 years old, after 14 years of marriage to Charles without conceiving, after believing she could never have children, she was pregnant. Margaret sank to the floor, test clutched in shaking hands, and wept. Jake found her there 20 minutes later. He saw the test, saw the tears, understood immediately. He dropped to his knees beside her for what felt like the 100th time. But this time there was no desperation, only wonder. "We're going to have a baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby," Margaret repeated, laughing and crying at once. Jake pressed his forehead to her stomach, arms wrapped around her. His shoulders shook with sobs of joy. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for giving me everything. A home, a family, a future. Thank you." Margaret ran her fingers through his hair. "Thank you for kneeling on my porch, for being desperate enough to beg, for being brave enough to love." They held each other on the bathroom floor, two broken people who had found wholeness together. The pregnancy was not easy. At 42, every doctor warned Margaret of risks, complications, possibilities of miscarriage or birth defects or maternal death. But Margaret had faced down killers and sieges and social ostracism. She would face this too. Jake became her constant support. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could find, spoke to her belly every morning, telling their child about the ranch, about the mountains, about the life waiting. He cooked gentle meals when morning sickness struck, rubbed her aching back, listened to her fears without trying to minimize them. And when the fear became too much, when Margaret woke in the night terrified she would lose this miracle, Jake held her and reminded her that fear and joy often arrived together, that both were signs of something precious. Victoria visited often, brought baby clothes, helped prepare the nursery, had truly become family again. December arrived with heavy snow. Margaret was 8 months pregnant, moving slowly, feeling the weight of the life inside her. Old Henry carved a cradle from oak, intricate designs of horses and mountains and stars, his way of apologizing, of contributing to the family he had helped save. And on a cold night in late December, 3 weeks before the baby was due, Margaret woke in pain, labor, too early, but unmistakable. Jake carried her to the wagon through 2 feet of snow, drove carefully but quickly to the hospital in Billings. The roads were treacherous. Every turn, every slide made his heart stop. But they arrived. Margaret was admitted. Labor progressed slowly, painfully. Jake never left her side, held her hand, wiped her forehead, spoke encouragement when her strength flagged. 14 hours of labor. Margaret screamed, wept, cursed, begged for it to be over. Then, as dawn broke on December 23, 1879, a cry filled the room. Strong, healthy, furious at being born into the cold world. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming infant on Margaret's chest. Margaret and Jake both wept, stared at the tiny, perfect creature they had created together. "Samuel," Margaret said, After your father." Jake had told her about Samuel Sullivan, a kind man who died when Jake was 5, a man who had loved his wife and son and worked himself to death trying to provide for them. Now the name would live on. In this new life, this new beginning, Jake held his son in his massive hands, dwarfing the infant tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm going to give you everything I never had," he whispered. "Stability, safety, love. You'll never doubt that you're wanted, never feel alone. I swear it." The baby grasped Jake's finger with his tiny hand, held tight, and Jake's heart, so broken for so long, finally felt whole. They brought Samuel home to Hartwell Ranch 3 days later. Victoria had decorated the house with evergreen branches and candles. Old Henry had finished the cradle. Christmas arrived with the kind of joy Margaret had not felt in years. They gathered around the fire. Victoria, Henry, Margaret, Jake, and baby Samuel. A family, chosen and earned and fiercely protected. Time moved forward as it always does. Samuel grew from infant to toddler to boy. He had Jake's green eyes and Margaret's blonde hair. He was gentle like his father, smart like his mother, and curious about everything. The ranch prospered. The silver mine, carefully managed, generated wealth that allowed them to expand. More cattle, better equipment, fair wages for the hands they hired. Jake proved to be an exceptional father, patient and kind, teaching Samuel about the land, about animals, about treating all living things with respect. Margaret watched her son and husband together and felt gratitude so deep it bordered on pain. This life, this family, this happiness she thought she would never have. Old Henry lived to see Samuel's 5th birthday, died peacefully in his sleep surrounded by the family he had helped save. Victoria never remarried. She found purpose in her law practice fighting for others who had been wronged by powerful men. She visited the ranch often, doting on her nephew, remaining close to Margaret. The county eventually accepted the Sullivan family, not quickly and not without continued whispers. But time and success wore down resistance, and when Samuel was 10, Jake finally found the courage to break the seal he had kept intact for 42 years. His hands trembled as he carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, the ink faded but still legible. It was brief, written in a shaking hand as influenza ravaged her body. "My dearest Jake, I know you are innocent. I have always known. I hope someday you find happiness again. Don't carry grief forever. Don't let my death stop you from living. Love someone, have children, build the life we dreamed of, even if I cannot be part of it. You deserve joy. Promise me you will find it. All my love, Grace." Jake read it once, twice, then carried it outside and burned it in the ranch fire pit, not from anger or pain, but from completion. Grace had given him permission to move forward, to love again, to build a new life, and he had. He had kept that promise. 16 years passed. Spring, 1895. Samuel was 15 now, strong and tall, though not quite the giant his father was. He worked the ranch with competence and pride. Margaret and Jake sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. They were older now. Margaret's blonde hair had gone silver. Jake's face showed the lines of 53 years, but their hands clasped together were steady. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked, "kneeling on this porch all those years ago?" Jake smiled. "Never. Best decision I ever made." Samuel approached dusty from work. "Pa, the north fence is fixed." "Good work, son." Samuel sat on the porch steps exactly where his father had sat so many times. "Ma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know that Pa was the right one? That it was worth all the trouble?" Margaret looked at Jake, then back at their son. "I knew because loneliness recognized loneliness, because his courage gave me courage, because sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings." She squeezed Jake's hand, "and because love, real love, is worth every sacrifice." Samuel nodded, processing this wisdom. The sun sank lower, the sky darkened, stars emerged one by one. This ranch, this family, this life, built on desperation and courage and a willingness to defy the world for something true. Years continued their march. Montana winter, 1920. The old man sat by the fire, his story told. Thomas, his grandson, stared with wide eyes. So Grandma really said yes, even though everyone was against it. Jake Sullivan, now 78, nodded. She did. Because love isn't about what other people think. It's about what you know in your heart. What happened to the letter from your first wife? Jake's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, but of course the letter was no longer there. He had burned it years ago when Samuel was just a boy. I opened it, Jake said quietly. When your father was 10, Grace had given me permission to move forward, to love again, and I did. He looked at the fire. Some wounds need to be healed, Thomas not kept open. Grace knew I loved her. That was enough. And she wanted me to be happy. It caught immediately, curled and blackened and turned to ash. What matters is the life I built after, Jake said. With your grandmother, with your father, with you. Was it worth it, Grandpa? All the trouble? Jake looked at the family photo on the mantel. Margaret at 84, still beautiful despite her years. Samuel at 40, proud and strong. Grandchildren gathered around. Every second, he said softly. Outside snow fell silent and thick. Inside warmth and family and the completion of a story that began with desperation and ended with grace. Thomas yawned. Jake ruffled his hair. Time for bed, boy. Tomorrow we'll go check the north fence together. The one great-grandpa fixed? The very same. Some things endure, Thomas. Good work, good land, good family. Those things last. The boy climbed the stairs to bed. Jake remained by the fire, an old man at peace. He thought of that December morning in 1878, standing outside his truck holding a crumpled advertisement facing his last chance. He thought of Margaret opening the door with a gun in her hand, of dropping to his knees on her porch, of the humiliation and desperation that had brought him to that moment. And he thought of everything that came after, the love, the danger, the triumph, the family. A knock on the study door. Margaret entered, moving slowly but still graceful. "Telling stories again?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. The boy asked how we met. Margaret smiled. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that a desperate giant begged for work, and a lonely widow took a chance." "Sounds like a fairy tale." It was, just one that happened to be real. They sat together in the firelight, two people who had defied the world and won, who had built something lasting from nothing, who had proven that love, when brave enough, could overcome any obstacle. Outside, the Montana winter held the land in its grip, but inside, Hartwell Ranch, warmth endured. The desperate giant who once had nothing had found everything, and the rich widow who thought her life was over had discovered it was just beginning. Their story, told now to grandchildren, would be told to great-grandchildren and beyond, a testament to the power of courage, of second chances of love that refuses to accept the world's limitations. Jake took Margaret's hand. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And as the fire burned low and the night deepened, they sat in the comfortable silence of two people who had walked through fire together and emerged stronger.